to Exercise Sports Science 324, Finance and Economics of Sport. This video serves as a complement to Module Learning Objective 3.4. Examine financial statements by using ratios as a tool for interpretation. This is a practice problem that involves Nike from 2019. Primary reason why we're looking at 2019 is because it was right before the pandemic, and Nike has undergone tremendous changes over the past 5 years. In Module 3, there is a section labeled Nike Financial Ratios Problem. It includes videos, practice problem, and financial statements for the practice problem. You will also be able to find this video there as well. So let's get started. So the first ratio we're going to look at is the current ratio. And the current ratio is current assets over current liabilities, which means we're going to need to look at the balance sheet. And when you look at Nike's consolidated balance sheet, the first thing that you will notice in the upper left-hand corner, it says dollars in millions, which means all of your answers are going to have to be multiplied by a million. So the first thing, let's look at the calculation. So our current assets, based on what the balance sheet says, is $16,525 million. Current liabilities are $7,866 million. These numbers are readily available on the balance sheet. After we do the calculation, we get 2.10. Nike has the ability to cover its short-term liabilities 2.10 times over with current assets. So as we mentioned earlier in the module, a 2-to-1 ratio here is good, but we would need to do a little more research to determine how good it is in comparison to Nike's competitors. The second ratio, the acid test or quick ratio. So current assets minus inventory divided by current liabilities. So essentially, it's just our current ratio, but what we're doing to our numerator is we're taking out inventory because it's the least liquid of our current assets. And once we do that, our answer is 1.39. Nike can cover its short-term liabilities 1.39 times over with its current assets other than inventory. The next ratio, we're going to go down to our asset management ratios, and we're going to look at the total asset turnover ratio. Now, the numerator is going to be net sales, net revenues, or revenues, regardless of how it's presented on Nike's financial statements. It's all coming from the income statement. And we're going to divide it by average total assets. And that, luckily, with the financial statements presented by Nike, we have 2 years worth of data to look at. So for the average total assets, we're just going to go to the balance sheet and get those two numbers, add them together, divide by 2, and that will be our denominator. So our numerator is 39,117,000,000 divided by 23,126,500,000. And that gives us an answer of 1.69, which basically is saying Nike's revenues exceeded assets, suggesting the company is using its assets effectively. Our next ratio is the inventory turnover ratio. And that is cost of goods sold or cost of sales, depending upon what company you're looking at, how they decide to interpret it, divided by average inventory. So once again, this is going to be the income statement divided by the balance sheet. And once we go back to our average inventory and get the two numbers, add them together, divide by 2. Here's what our calculation looks like. 21,643,000,000 divided by 5,441,500,000. And we get 3.98. Nike turned over or sold or replenished its inventory roughly 4 times during 2019. Now, this is where it's going to be important that you have metrics for comparison to the likes of Under Armour and Reebok and other companies just to get a better idea as to where Nike stands. The next ratios will be the leverage ratios, and we'll start with the debt ratio. And the debt ratio is pretty straightforward. It's total liabilities over total assets. Now, here, as we look at it, total liabilities can be calculated in the following manner. Total liabilities and shareholders' equity minus total shareholders' equity, depending upon how it's presented on the financial statements. You might just not see a total line for total liabilities. If you don't, you have to go with this approach. If not, it should just basically say total liabilities. And we're looking at the balance sheet yet again. So here in the Nike example, it just wasn't separated out for total liabilities. That's why we needed to do the subtraction problem. So total liabilities and shareholders' equity minus total shareholders' equity divided by the total assets, and that gives us 61.9%. So this should be rounded. I'm going to round it up for you to 2 decimal places. My apologies for that. And that's what it should look like, 61.88%. So essentially, Nike's debt was almost 62% of the value of its assets. Money borrowed from creditors made up almost 62% of Nike's value of assets. That's a telltale. And that's a little bit of a red flag, because remember what we talked about during our previous video in the module, that you want to be in that 30 to 40% range or even lower. And in Nike's case here, you're pushing 62%. The next ratio we're looking at is the interest coverage ratio, and that is our EBIT divided by our interest expense. Now, the big thing we're going to look at here, there are a few different ways to calculate EBIT, because it's not going to be specifically stated on the financial statements, particularly the income statement. So here are the 2 ways that you can find EBIT with the Nike financial statements. Could be revenues minus cost of sales minus total selling and administrative expense plus other income expense net. Or you can do income before income taxes plus interest expense income net. So those are the 2 ways that you can find EBIT on the Nike financial statements. And then once you do that, you're going to get an answer of 98.98, meaning this number suggests Nike can cover its interest expense nearly 99 times over with its earnings or operating income. Now we'll go down to the profitability ratios. And in the profitability ratios, we're going to look at net profit margin and return on equity. Let's start off with net profit margin. So net profit margin is going to be net income divided by sales or revenue. So here we are, we're dealing with the income statement yet again, with the net income and the sales or revenue. So once we look at our income statement and pull the numbers, 4,029,000,000 divided by 39,117,000,000, we're going to get 10.30%. And that states the percentage of sales Nike returned to the company's owners in the form of profits on their capital was 10.30%. And then we'll look at return on equity. And that is net income divided by shareholders or owners' equity. So that means our numerator, the net income, is going to come from the income statement. And our denominator, the shareholders or owners' equity, is going to come from the balance sheet. And once we pull those numbers from those respective statements, we're going to receive an answer of 44.57%. And that is the percentage of ownership stake or equity that Nike's owners realized as profit during the period. And last but not least, we're going to look at our market value ratios. So we'll start with market value. We're going to go with price per share of common stock multiplied by the number of outstanding shares. As I had mentioned in the video in this module, the importance of just the assumption of a price per share of common stock that I would provide to you under normal circumstances. If it's traded on the New York Stock Exchange, you're going to look at the close of the market at the New York Stock Exchange. But I'm just going to give it to you here. So we're going to assume price per share common stock is 77.14. And then what you're going to do, you're going to go to your balance sheet and look under stockholders' equity. And in that section, you're going to see a couple of numbers. And the numbers that you're going to pay attention to are as follows: the Class A convertible and the Class B. Class A convertible is going to be 315 and 329 shares outstanding. And Class B is going to be 1,253 and 1,272 shares outstanding. You're going to add the 315 from the Class A convertible to the 1,253 from the Class B. But remember, they're valued in millions. You add those together, multiply by 7714, you're going to get an answer like 120,955,520,000, which is essentially saying Nike was worth nearly 121 billion as of May 2019. And last but not least, we're going to look at our price to earnings ratio. Once again, it's going to be price per share of common stock divided by our earnings per share. So we know what our price per share of common stock is because I've provided it for you, and that's going to be the 77.14. But now we have to calculate our earnings per share. So the way we're going to calculate our earnings per share is as follows. We're going to take the net income, which we get from the income statement, and divide it by the number of outstanding shares of common stock, which we used in our market value ratio up here. So essentially, we find our net income from the income statement divided by the number of outstanding shares of common stock. We do the math there, and then we pull it all together, and then we get our final answer of 30.02, which says Nike stock price in May 2019 was more than 30 times the company's earnings. So those are all the financial ratios from the Nike problem in a nutshell. But I also want to show you, I put a practice sheet up here as well on the tab next to your answers. So you can actually spend some time working through it and practicing as well. So everything here is located in our Module 3 in a specific section labeled Nike Financial Ratios Problem. Like, once again, there'll be videos, practice problem, and the financial statements that you need to solve for the problem will all be there.